Okay, Goober, we know you don't like reading, but so we're going to tell you a bedtime story. One People, the novel, Guy Kennaway. The First Stranger. The only tourists who stop in Cousins Cove were those with a flat tyre or those who licked them car, which is why the bridge over the river was so useful. It had a vicious reverse camber and was built slightly out of line with the bend, so that unless you knew the road well, you had suddenly to correct the car's direction to prevent it ploughing into the riverbed. Cove's first tourist entrepreneurs were the Ute Dem, who sat under the almond tree on the seashore waiting to help whiteys out of the swamp in the hope of getting a few dollars tip. American college boys on rental motorbikes were the most reliable crashers, driving too fast on the wrong side of the road, high on a spliff. They didn't stand a chance on the Cove Bridge. 3 of the Ute Dem were from the Williams family, and one, Granville, known as O'Neill, was a Bligeon, one of the other noble houses of Cove. They were all present one windy autumn afternoon in 1978 when Billy, a black American man of about 40, stepped off a minibus. He was the first stranger any of them had ever seen voluntarily stop in the village. Up until then, strangers swept straight through without stopping on their way to Negril. Once or twice someone had engine trouble or a flat tyre, but coming to Cousins Cove was an act of volition for Billy, and not for this reason alone. Everyone liked him. Yeah. Hang on, is that the right page? Yeah. Billy came to Cove on a search for native dancers, which he said there's a demand for on the cruise ships and in the hotels. Most of the guys on the boats right now are dancers from the States, he informed a rapt audience who assembled to watch Joe and his business partner Yayon argue over a hammer they were sharing while they banged a bamboo extension onto Joe's shed. It was thought an extension might make Whitey stop. After all, Ritz Cafe in Negril, which is always full of tourists, has a massive extension. They only had 2-inch screws for the job, but the single slightly broken screwdriver that served Cove for so many years had finally broken, so they were banging the screws in with a hammer. The dancers on the ships pretend to be Caribbean, right? Explained Billy, but they have to learn all the moves and are paid one hell of a lot for it. Plus, they're all joining a union, which the operators don't like one bit. I can tell you. I figured you guys must know all the dancers already, kind of have them in your blood, and would be prepared to undercut the market. They'll still make a packet by your standards, he added quickly. But I must have been in 20 villages so far, and nobody knows the traditional African stuff in any of them. You know, old tribal dances like limbo and such like. You don't seem to have them these days. You don't seem to do them these days. It was true. Although billed as native activity, the only limbo in Jamaica took place in front of white people at the hotels. To everyone in Cousins Cove, it was a new dance. It's one hell of a pity, because there's some money in this, believe me, sighed Billy. Meek and Limbo, Vincent piped up. Vinto was the gangly, gummy-eyed 13-year-old nephew of Joe Williams. He got his younger brother Maxwell and O'Neill to hold up a stick of cane, which he edged towards and collapsed under. Getting up quickly, he said, "Tom Trevor," and say, "Fool! Now drop it! Me can do it! Watch!" The second time he succeeded. "You don't know how to do wheel dance or fire dance?" asked Billy. "Yeah, man, for sure. Dem any hotel-style dance," Vinton answered. "Dem easy. For me uncle know dem." Uncle Tom had played banjo in a bright shirt provided by the hotel at Round Hill in the 60s and told stories about the goings-on there. "He can tell me how dem run." Billy looked at Vinton sceptically. "For sure, man," Vinton said with a bright, confident smile. "No problem. Trust me." The Jungle Rhythms, as Billy named the troupe, was made up of 11 guys, almost every available man in Cove, but didn't dwindle by the third rehearsal to 4, Vinton, Maxwell, O'Neill and Trouble. Billy produced a bit of paper which guaranteed each of them $2 US whenever they performed, which they painstakingly signed to prevent him backing out of the agreement. Even a single US dollar was an immense sum to the boys. The year before, Vinton changed a flat tyre for a tourist who mistakenly gave a greenback to Glen Roy, his cousin, who was standing by giving Vinton instructions, most of which had been wrong. It was the first dollar bill they had touched. It was such a curiosity it was worth more, in a way, than the 8 Jamaican dollars it would fetch in the Bank of Nova Scotia in Lucia. So Glenroy kept it to show anyone who wanted to look. Uncle Tom was no help with the choreography. He roared with laughter when they told you what they were up to. So the boys told Billy he taught them how the dances went in one intense session and enthusiastically invented all the traditional dances themselves. They should have been at school, but Vinton hadn't been for years. Originally, his reason for not attending was that he didn't have a school uniform or shoes and was too proud to go in the rags he'd grown up in. But when, at 9 years old, he was thrown out of his mother's yard, an old lady of 40 called Miss Liza, who needed the help of a Pickney for things like moving the goat and fetch water, lured him to her yard with the promise of shoes and khaki. Life wasn't as easy as he'd anticipated at Miss Liza's, but it was too late to move back in with Mama. So instead he spent hours dawdling on errands, ignoring the fake chants of Vinton that wafted across the village from Miss Liza's yard. She did give him the shoes and uniform, but he didn't waste them on school. He was so proud of the outfit, he brandished it all day long up and down the Main. One day, Billy didn't turn up for the rehearsals and couldn't be found anywhere. Michael, O'Neill's elder brother, was quick to laugh and thought it was the last they'd seen of him. With his off-the-peg American clothes, Billy had displaced Michael as the village's Chris dresser, and Michael didn't like him. But the boys were familiar enough with disappointment to have spent many hours boasting about their imminent fame and prosperity, so that if, or when, in the case of Cousins Cove, everything fell through, they knew they had been admired, or more importantly, envied by the rest of the village for a short time at least. But Billy did return after a few days with a black eye, some revealing stage clothes, and the news of an audition in Montego Bay. The fake leopard skin loincloths were too small, but Billy said that made them better. And with only Billy and a white man in the audience for the audition, the boys didn't get nervous and put on their best performance. But Billy, who was heard nothing said against the jungle rhythms, and to admit to himself that his group looked unlikely to pass the audition. In Cousins Cove, the foursome seemed athletic and appealing, but with the critical eye of the white man beside him, Billy suddenly saw how tall and spindly O'Neill really was, how spherical Trouble looked, and how enormous Vinton's feet were. Maxwell, at least, was perfectly proportioned and handsome by anyone's standards. But his problem was he was minuscule. They were quite unaware of their glaring shortcomings as professional dancers, but he was so moved by their native belief in themselves, and by extension him, that after one particularly clumsy sequence, executed without an iota of embarrassment, he had to wipe a tear from his eye. After the audition, Billy introduced them to the white man, whom he informed that all the dancers were totally authentic and were passed down to the jungle rhythms by a village elder. In accordance with Billy's instructions, they agreed with everything he said to the white man and answered 17 when the white man asked their ages. A week later, after spending an hour and a half at the public telephone in Lucia, 5 minutes of which was in conversation, Billy came away with the news that the Jungle Rhythms had passed the audition and were booked for a 4-week cruise around Cuba on a Yugoslav shipping line. Carried by the conductor of a crammed minibus, the news got to Cove before Billy, where it swept through the population. Though by the time it got to Fozzie, who lived in the last yard on the ball ground, the engagement was a residency in a Miami nightclub and lasted not 4 weeks but 2 years and included a house, car and white girls. When Billy turned up, the boys were Ponder Street exulting in their success. The first person he'd buck up on was Michael, who, thinking Billy might not have heard the news, asked him if he could rejoin the rhythms, but he dropped out at the second rehearsal. Billy shrugged him off, found the others and got them all drunk on one red stripe each at Joe's shed. He was genuinely elated and first time expressed surprise at their success. I never really believed this would happen, you know. I never really thought we could get our shit together enough to make it a professional gig. I mean, when I first set eyes on you guys, I thought, Billy, forget it, this ain't gonna work, but I was so goddamn desperate. Vinton was hurt by this. No, say that, man, he said. When you find we, you buck up on a whole heap of talent. Yeah, man, insisted Maxwell. I know, said Billy with tears of happiness welling up in his eyes. Well, now I know. Hey, Joe. Yeah, Billy? Another beer for everyone. Hey, the boys were astonished. They'd never seen anyone buy someone 2 beers. Those who weren't in the rhythms hung about in the darkness outside the sheds and had not shifted off when Billy, by then in a state of euphoria, left the bar with his arms around his boys. When they were past the fishermen pushing out their canoes, he said, "Isn't this the greatest feeling in the world? We're all here in this beautiful place about to begin a new chapter in our lives, which we're all going to be in on together, yeah? You know what I mean?" "Yeah, man," said Maxwell, who did. "Yeah, man," said O'Neill hesitantly, because he didn't. "And I got a feeling we're going to go a good distance in each other's company," said Billy, staring up at the stars. "Just give me your passport and let me go," Maxwell laughed. "Passports? You guys got passports, right?" "No, man," they told him. "No problem. We'll get on to that tomorrow morning. But maybe tonight will be a good moment to get the hemorrhoids test over and done with." "What hemorrhoid?" Trouble asked. "You know, piles." There was a pause. They're a complaint every dancer has to keep a watch for. They've ruined many a career, I can tell you. Quite a few great dancers who could have made a fortune had to throw the towel in on account of them. You ever heard of Baryshnikov? No. Him from Montego Bay? No, he's American, a great dancer. Made a mint. Now he damn near lost his career due to piles. But it's a simple enough test, nothing to worry about. If you get on top of the problem early, they're a cinch to eliminate. I just run my forefinger up your anus to check if you're likely to get into any trouble. Trouble? You look a little tight in that region. I may be able to do a little work relaxing you down there at the same time. Trouble said nothing. "Nobody put finger in a me body," Vinton said. "No, man," said Maxwell. "Joe," said O'Neill dismissively. "Don't that sound right?" "Who touched that me tomp him?" stated Vincent. "Look, it's not that important, right? If anything crops up on board, I guess the ship's doctor can handle it. Hey, check that out." But he pointed to the distant glistening cruise ship inching across the Black Sea and Bay. "That's where we're headed, guys." "Yeah, man," said Maxwell softly. Trouble, O'Neill and Vinton nodded, but said nothing. The ship looked a long, long way away to them. The prospect of leaving Cove suddenly seemed scary. They were to be away 4 weeks. The longest any of them had ever been out of the village was for the audition, 9 hours. Each had their own gnawing worry. Trouble, he had no crisp clothes. O'Neill, he had no shoes. Vinton, he wouldn't be able to use a flush toilet, for he, like everyone else, had always used the bush. O'Neill wisely waited for his father to be in a good mood before he asked for his birth certificate. So when he heard Mr. Blidgeon bragging that he'd sold the Green Island police station a load of sea sand to salt-free river sand to build the new cell block with, he put his request to him. "What do you need age paper for, Pickney?" Mr. Blidgeon snapped back. He looked so aggressive, like a boxer dog, and had once almost killed a bad boy with a tin of mackerel in a larder bag, which he jumped out of the bush to rob Mr. Blidgeon. "Me going a foreign fi dance with Billy and me need one passport, sir," O'Neill told his father. "You think, Billy, women fi go a foreign fi dance too?" Mr. Blidgeon asked. "No, sir," Billy went to Uncle Vinton. "Trouble, Maxwell and me," replied O'Neill apologetically. Well, you know how to go, understand? For me go, nobody in this family reach up in a foreign. You think pick me, take first place to him, father? No, son, no, sir. Take up the rake and work, boy. You no go nowhere till you pay your father the debt he raised for you. Go on, take it up. And Mr. Blizzard in his turn took up a stick and set to work whipping his son's long thin legs as he raked the yard. Later, Miss Linnet, O'Neill's mother, gave him the birth certificate. Now tell your father and carry back come gimme soon. Yeah, mama, thank ya. When Trouble, who was a year and a half junior to O'Neill, asked the mountainous Miss Sitara, his granny, for his birth surface ticket, she lumbered swiftly across the creaking wooden floor, lifted her mattress, slid out the family heirlooms. A couple of disintegrating official letters relating to her brother Rushton's deafness, some blurred photographs, one or two of people she didn't know, yet treasured nevertheless, simply because they were photographs, all the documents relating to her favourite son-in-law's conviction for assault and rape of two different women, and a couple of his painful letters from Spanish Town Jail, a 1972 Jamaica Labour Party calendar, two prescriptions she couldn't afford to fill, and birth certificates of two of the 6 minors in her care. You send me money each month, you understand? She shouted at Trouble, even though he was just across the room. And send down 1 bed cover and 1 cooker. Take this, she thrust a bit of paper in his hand. When Maxwell and Vinton asked for their birth certificates, people heard Blackie's laugh on the other side of the ball ground. Actually, only an average distance for Blackie, whose laugh was one of the 7 wonders of Cousins Cove. She once laughed so loudly, a solitary fisherman working out of sight of land in his canoe heard her disembodied guffaws coming over the horizon. Before she ceased laughing, she went at her sons with the flat side of a machete, a surface which had more than once made high-speed contact with their flesh. But that Sunday evening, when Blackie walked up and down Ponder Street in her finery, Trevor, as agile as he was naughty, slithered over the room partition through the 9-inch gap and found Mama's papers. He climbed back with 1 birth certificate between his teeth. Dalton Wedderburns, his own in the formal name no one ever used. O'Neill, Maxwell and Trouble toiled over the first line of the passport application form until Billy took over and answered all the questions at an astonishing speed, which confirmed the idea they had that he was very clever. But he'd known the answer to the Kool-Aid radio quiz question and foxed the whole of Jamaica for 6 weeks. Mr. Moneyman asked, 18th King of France shared the same name. What is that name? When a caller said, is the answer Dwight? Billy laughed. What the right name then? Michael, who looked in through the window of Joe's shed where a radio played on the bar, asked Billy. Louis, Billy replied. That not true, Michael said. But a week later, a caller said, Louis, and won the accumulated jackpot of 600 Jamaican dollars, which most people felt was at least partially owed to Billy. Billy explained to Vinton he had to go to the government office in Mobay to get a duplicate certificate. Tell them your parents' names, place and date of birth, all that shit, and you'll get it easy. But me no know me father name, said Vinton shamefully. Ask your mother. Me ask for me mother, but she no tell me. Why? Me sit down and think about that all day, Billy. 8 hours after Vinton was born in the Lucia Hospital in 1966, Blackie, his mother, went back to her yard to wait for Aubrey, the baby father, to come and acknowledge his son. She knew better than to walk to his yard with the infant. Her friend Babs had confronted her baby father with his daughter when she was 3 days old, and he had licked them down in front of his friends with a axe handle. After waiting 4 days, Blackie's father, a drinker and a fighter called Harvest, shook Blackie in the night and demanded with overproof rum on his breath the name of the infant's father. She didn't tell him or anyone else, and the next day tore up the birth certificate with Aubrey's name on it and gave her own surname, Williams, to the child. From that time on, she swore never to business with Aubrey again, however much he sweet her up with words. This is why she never told Vinton who his father was. despite the fact that Aubrey lived on the back street and Vinton passed his yards practically every day. They'll give you the birth certificate with just your mother's name. Sure they will, and you know it might even have the name of your father on it. With Chris' clothes borrowed from around the village, Vinton waited for the minibus in the short, still, smoky dawn before the sun exploded over the top of the hill. He saw Michael, Con, O'Neill and a group of little boys walking up the slope from the seashore. Boggy, called Michael, using one of Vinton's names. Yeah, man. Con here from Walla, cousin in Mobay, that Billy is one botty man. Dem gonna dance upon one ship with the botty man, Con in his high-pitched voice, making everyone but O'Neill and Vinton roar with laughter. They looked sick. The thud of a bass line heralded a minibus called Dutchman, which came off the long straight and around the corner, listing heavily with a G-force. Vinton didn't stop it, nor did he stop Pomp Action, which careered by a minute later. He had to find out more about this. He and O'Neill found Maxwell bouncing barefoot down the back street, slopping water from a bucket he was carrying, and singing at the top of his voice, "Me no more move cow, me dem, me no more catch water, me no more rake the yard, dem." Michael say Billy one botty man, Vinton told his brother. "Rascal Michael is an idiot, fool, him no like Billy, everybody know that," said Maxwell, adding, "Blood clot." Walla cousin here in May Bay, Billy tried to interfere with one boy. There was a pause while Maxwell ruminated on this. Then he said, suck teeth, then said, "Chaw! Me nah go upon no boat with no botty man," said Vincent. "Nah, sir," said Maxwell ambivalently. Then added with more conviction, "Ya can't business with no botty man." O'Neill gravely agreed, relieved this would mean he could return his age paper to Miss Linnett before Miss Oblivion found it was missing and beat her bad. Shouts could be heard from Miss Ciatra's yard where Billy stayed, so the boys hurried towards them. Miss Ciatra had moved the infant Craig, Dwight and Yvette into the octogenarian Miss Amy's bed in order to rent a room to Billy for a couple of $1 a week. The boundaries of the various yards in Cousins Cove were by and large invisible but known and respected by all. They operated like a force field around either one or a group of houses. Those whose yard it was could wander in and out from the street, but all outsiders had to stop on the borderline, which often only someone from Cove could recognise, and hail up whoever they wanted to see in the house by calling out their name. It was on the boundary of Miss Sitara's yard that a growing crowd of curious people stood. Michael shouted abuse at Billy, who cowered inside. "Botty man," he called her. "Move from here, botty boy." An elderly woman, the usually kind and helpful Miss Jolie, threw a stone, and a boy with a broken voice yelled, "Pussyclot!" Inside, Billy sat on the bed, trembling with terror, occasionally peering through a gap in the louvered shutters, and jumping whenever a stone cracked against the thin wood clapboarding of the wall. "Oh my God," he muttered, crossing himself feverishly. A minibus drew up momentarily, diverting attention. The door slid back, and after a moment, Miss Sitara hobbled out, dressed in her best clothes. She looked almost upholstered, as though she were padded with springs and might even have possessed a pair of ball and claw feet. A visit to Dr. Berry in Green Island, made on the expectation of the funds trouble was going to mail her from the ports he'd visit on the cruise, necessitated wearing the finery. "Faggots!" screamed Michael at the house. "You're one faggot, Billy!" Let him pass out, shouted Miss Sitara, passing the crowd before her. Inside, she said, "Pack up your things in your suitcase, Billy, and jump through that back window and run off a back street." Billy frenetically pulled his glad rags together. Another rock cracked against the side of the house. "Go on," she urged. Run now. But as he squeezed out the back window, he said, "Hold on now, the rent. You owe me for rent." With one leg out the window, Billy dug it into his pocket. "How much is it? $3? He winced as another stone struck the house. The crowd was now a mob, and it was getting angry. Miss Sitara saw the strength of a negotiating position. Give me $10. 10? Cried Billy. 3 rent, 7 for cancellation. Jesus, Billy said under his breath, reaching for his wallet. While he clambered out of the back of the shack, Mr. Tara went to the front to pacify the mob. Hold on, him just come. Let him pass out from a yard, understand? Afterwards, when the story of Billy and the jungle rhythms was told in the sheds and on the porches of Cousin's Cove, no one ever blamed Mrs. Tara for this little deception, because everyone, with perhaps the exception of Michael, saw it for the simple act of kindness it was. When the cry, him round the back street, finally went up, most people were glad that the 3-minute start Billy got meant that he was pretty well out of the village before anyone could catch up with him. The Cousin Cove mob likes to make a lot of noise, but had little taste for blood, and had been known in the past to catch up with and run right past the culprit rather than attack him. At the ball ground, Billy's suitcase burst open and a trail of bright clothes was laid across the bumpy cricket pitch, containing an empty case with a broken cash. The mob chased him round Bubbles' yard, parted into 2 round the primary school, and met again on the other side to see Billy sprinting down the middle of the tarmac main in the direction of what the government had recently rather optimistically named Industry Cove. It was not a name that stuck. By then, the Cousins Cave mob had run out of both venomous jibes and, more importantly, puff, chasing Billy all the way down the hill, which only meant walking up in the increasing heat of the morning. So they slowed to a trot and then a standstill and laughingly congratulated each other on a good morning's work. One night, over a year later, Trevor O'Neill and Vinton were scanning the shallows near the canoes with paraffin-soaked rag torches, hoping to find swimp. Vinton and O'Neill looking up to see a glistening, silent cruise liner hanging in the dark out to sea. Both were about to resume their search of the sandy shallows when Maxwell, a little way off, said, "Remember Billy?" "Yeah, man," said Vinton. "Billy cool," Maxwell said. "Yeah, man, me no," answered Vinton. "Remember when him buy we 2 red stripe?" "Yeah, man, Billy kinda nice." "But it were a botty man," Maxwell said, to stop himself recalling more good things about Billy. "Yeah, man," agreed O'Neill. "And you can't business with that," Maxwell sighed, and all 3 bent back over the water to look for the swimp, happy to think about something else.